Hey guys, in today's video we're going to look at how to build an analog clock like this with HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So sit back, relax and let's get started. I'm going to use StackBlitz for this project for simplicity, but you can of course set up your own local environment for this. So I go to stackblitz.com and I select the option to create a new JavaScript project. There are a few files being auto-generated, and first we're going to go into index.html. Let's remove this auto-generated div here and create a div for our clock. Inside that div we are creating 3 more divs, one for each hand of our clock. We're giving them IDs to later be able to identify them from our JS code. Then in the JavaScript file we'll remove everything except the CSS import at the top. And then let's create variables for the HTML elements we've just created, getting each of them by their IDs. Next, we're going to create a function called drawHourTicks and call it at the top here. And in this method, we will draw 60 little ticks around the front of the clock face for each minute of the hour. And to do that, we first need the radius of the clock element, which is its width divided by 2. Then in a loop that runs 60 times, we're creating div elements for every tick, giving each of them a class name. Next, we're calculating the position and rotation of the tick depending on its index, which is equivalent to the minute it represents on the clock. First, we need the tick's angle. So our index divided by 60 tells us how far along we are in our lap around the clock. Then multiplying that by 2 pi, which equals 360 degrees, or the full circle in radians, translates that into an angle. Then to calculate how far we need to move the tick in x direction, starting from the top left corner of the clock, we'll take the sine of that angle and multiply the result by the clock radius. And then we need to add the clock radius to that because we want the 0th tick to be horizontally centered along the x-axis. Then similarly for our y translation, we're taking the cosine of the angle multiplied by the clock radius and subtract all that from the clock radius so that our 0th tick will be at the top of the clock instead of in the vertical center. This is important because later we will give the ticks a longer width than height via CSS. And then all that's left is to add these transformations to the div element for each tick. So using the style.transform property, we first add translations along the x and y axes and a rotation according to our angle. And importantly, we're subtracting 90 degrees or pi divided by 2 from the result so that the 0th tick will be standing upright instead of lying flat on the side. And finally, we can add the tick to our clock element. Then in our CSS file, let's add some basic styling and remove all the generated content in here. We're giving the clock element a width and a background color, and we're setting its aspect ratio to always be a square. Position relative is important because later we want to lay out all the children elements using position absolute in relation to the parent clock element. Just a bit of margin to the top and auto on the side to center the clock horizontally. Then for our ticks, first of all we set the transform origin to be center left because that's how we conceptually thought about it when we did the calculations. Then as mentioned, it needs position absolute and a small height and a little bigger width. And when we add a background color, we are finally able to see the ticks for the first time. Now we want to display the hands of the clock that show us the current time. Let's add a function for that and call it from the top of our JS file. First, we grab a new date object that gives us the current time. We're going to pick it apart a bit, first by putting the seconds value into a variable. Then we get the minutes, but that would only give us the minute value as a whole number. But we don't want our clock hands to jump from 1 minute to the next but instead to transition smoothly between the minutes and hours. So that's why we add the current seconds divided by 60 to the minute value. And likewise for the hours, we'll grab them from the date object and add the share of the current hour to the result. Now for calculating the angles of the hands, starting with the hour hand, we're dividing the hours value by 12 to get the part of the lap around the clock that's already passed. Then we multiply that by 2 pi, so 360 degrees, to convert it to an angle. And in the end, subtracting 90 degrees or pi half from it, so that the hand points upwards at 0 hours. Similarly for the minutes and seconds, only here we have to divide the values by 60, of course. Then we add the necessary transformations to our hand elements by using the CSS transform property. We're adding a translation in the Y direction to align them better with the ticks on our clock. And then we add a rotation around the corresponding angle for each hand. We can't see our clock hands yet, since they have no contents and no visible styling, so let's go to our style.css again. And for the hand class, we're adding a background color as well as position absolute. And also top and left of -50% to center them within the clock. The transform origin should be 0, so the rotations are always relative to the mounting point of the hand in the center of the clock face. Also, as we said, we want a smooth transition. Then the 3 specific hand elements get different heights and widths each, as well as a bit of border radius. And there we go, we have a clock that shows the current time. A clock like this is still a bit pointless though, because it's standing still and of course it should keep updating every second. So at the top of our JS file, let's add a setInterval call that calls our update clock hands logic once every 1000 milliseconds. And there it is, the clock is ticking. Now at the moment all our ticks look the same and it's a bit hard to see the exact time the clock is showing. So inside our draw hour ticks function, we add a logic to add a class to every 5th tick on our clock by checking the modulo of our loop index divided by 5. If it's a 0, we want to add the class. Then in the CSS, we style the ticks that have this class with a different background color, as well as making them a bit longer. And now we can read the time of the clock more easily. That is it. We have a working analog clock built with HTML and CSS and just a tiny bit of JS magic. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to share your ideas to improve on this clearly already perfect and absolutely flawless project.